If you want to win in the new GHB, you need a list that can score battle tactics, and that's exactly what you get here. To win a game, you need to score 50 points out of holding objectives and 30 out of completing 2 battle tactic cards. The core of the game hasn't changed that much, except for one big twist. But the entire battle tactics system has been completely overhauled, as well as one big change: visibility. Non-flying, non-monster units are now invisible to the enemy if they're within 1 inch of any obscuring terrain. In this GHB, not only about half the terrain is obscuring, but objectives can count as obscuring too. We now include our battle tactics in our army list, which means we can and should prepare for them. The new format also demands much more effort than before. Building a list without them in mind will lose you the game before it even starts. Let's take a look at the 6 battle tactic cards and break them down. Remember, you have to include 2 of these in your army list. Each card is divided into 3 scoring sections: Affray, Strike, and Domination. But you can only score 1 of them per card and only in sequence. Since we include 2 cards, that means we can score up to 2 battle tactics per battle round. First up, Master the Paths. Destroy an enemy hero. Sounds simple, right? But think about it. Where does a hero usually sit? Exactly. Safely tucked behind their army, behind a wall of bodies. Regiments are led by heroes, and there is no real reason to bring any extra ones. So while this tactic seems straightforward, it's actually a major gatekeeper. Most armies will only field 2 or 3 heroes, and very few of them will enter melee. On top of that, your opponent knows what you're trying to do. That means even holding back a Bloodthirster suddenly becomes worth 15 points. To pull this off, you will need fast units with small base sizes, ones that can slip through gaps or ignore movement blocks to get to those heroes. And forget about shooting those small heroes. Not only is the guarded hero rule still in place, but since most heroes don't fly, they're simply not visible at all if they're near obscuring terrain. Next, we need to have more of our units in neutral territory than the enemy. If no neutral territory exists, then no enemy units are allowed in our territory instead. Right off the bat, it says within, not wholly within. This makes a huge difference. Your units just need to toe in neutral territory, which makes this tactic a lot easier than it sounds. As a standalone battle tactic, this one would be easy. Just move your army into neutral territory or push a few enemies out of your turf. But here's the problem. We already committed at least 1 unit to a kamikaze mission trying to kill a hero. The earliest you can score this tactic is turn 2, and more likely turn 3, since setting up that hero kill takes time. Once again, this tactic is all about damage and mobility. You need to hit hard enough to clear enemy units, move fast enough to control neutral ground before your opponent does. The third tactic requires 3 different units wholly within 9 inches of 3 different table corners. One of those corners can be in your territory, and 1 unit can be set up there, like through a teleport. This is a perfect example how tricky these tactics really are. The earliest you can score this would be turn 3, but the real challenge isn't positioning. It's having 3 separate units that can just hang around in the corners without needing to contribute elsewhere. And even later in the game, the bigger problem might simply be have 3 units left. To score this, you need cheap, fast units. The cheaper and faster, the better. Think Screamers, Aetherwings, Theradons, or even better, non-flyers, like Gryphounds, who can stay hidden near and behind terrain. Even cheap units like Wreckers can work. They're not fast, but they're small in points and base size, and they have 3 turns to get there. Quick summary: you will need fast, mobile damage dealers to take out the enemy hero, and cheap, flexible units to outnumber the enemy forces and reach the corners. You can already see how impossible this would be if you built your list first and only then looked at the mission. The second card is called Restless Energy, and it's an arrogant one. It starts with a freebie: just take an objective from your opponent. It's almost a given. Well, we will have to take objectives from our opponent throughout the game. But the tricky part is when. Are we storming their home objectives in turn 1, or are we trying to drive them off their objectives later once they've started spreading across the map? The follow-up condition demands you to hold all objectives in enemy territory, or if there are none, you have to take away all your opponent's objectives. At first, it sounds easier to take 1 objective early, then grab the rest later. But in reality, it's the opposite. Securing an objective for an entire turn is much harder than just touching it briefly to score. Finally, the last part. There is no trick, no clever play, just pure, raw domination. Control all objectives. On missions with only 3 objectives, that might be possible with some smart moves. But the average mission has 4.58 objectives, with most featuring 5 5 or 6. On those maps, you will need to swarm the board and push out your opponent completely. And that's why I called it arrogant. If you're controlling every objective on the map, you're probably already winning hard. Quick summary. Take objectives. That means you will need high objective control, lots of bodies or units with strong values, or just wipe the enemy off the board. The third tactic card turns this battlefield into a game of hide and seek. Intercept and recover. At the start of the battle, your opponent picks 3 of their units to be treasure holding. You score 5 points each time you destroy one of those treasure holding units. There are 2 small twists. First, those units must start on the battlefield. No later deployed units can be chosen. Second, if you double turn, one of those units can discard its treasure, meaning you won't score by killing it. Your opponent will pick units that are either very durable, easy to hide, or highly mobile. This means you need at least one high damage, high mobility unit. Otherwise, your opponent will just outrun or hide from your army. Another problem, if your army relies on shooting, you're in trouble. Because in this GHB, non-fly, non-monster units are easily hidden thanks to the new obscuring terrain rule. Card number 4, Wrathful Cycles. It starts off super easy. Just control more objectives than your opponent. That usually means taking one objective, maybe even stealing it right under your opponent's units. Notice anything familiar? We'll come back to that in list building section. It plays a bigger role there. After that easy start, the difficulty ramps up fast. The second part of this requires you to be the underdog, and then half of your units rounded up. Use a fight ability. And no, you can't cheat it. You need at least one unit on the battlefield. But here's the thing. The hard part isn't the fight itself. Just bring some additional durable units or strike first units and charge into the enemy. Or, here's a clever trick. According to the core rules, a unit can use a fight ability if it's in combat or if it charged that turn. Attacking is not required to count as fighting. So, take half of your army, charge some random units, and boom, every unit that charged can use a fight ability, even if they don't lift a weapon. The real obstacle here is the underdog condition, especially since this is the second step of the tactic. You have already scored 5 points for holding more objectives, which means you're more likely to be ahead on points because you've held more objectives and scored your first battle tactic. And hoping your opponent double turns you without wiping your army, yeah, that's not a strategy you can or should rely on. But wait, let's look at the third part of the card. Utter madness. You need to have a unit wholly within each large quarter of the battlefield, control more objectives than your opponent, and have no enemy units contesting your objectives. What does that mean in practice? You will need at least 4 units on the board, some pushing your opponents away, others holding uncontested ground, or you just have to snatch unguarded objectives. Let's summarize what you need to score this tactic. You need the ability to take objectives at will, high mobility, and a way to become the underdog when it matters. The first 2 can be built into your list, but what about the third part? That's almost entirely skill and situation dependent. And not only your skill, the skill of your opponent as well, which is an odd combo. Card number 5, Scouting Force. Every non-hero infantry or cavalry unit becomes a scout. Even their replacements are scouts too. The first condition? Move 3 scout units wholly outside your territory. It's easy on paper, but depending on your opponent's army, it can be risky. Very risky indeed. Next, you will need to control a total of 3 objectives or terrain features within enemy territory. Not wholly within, just partially inside is enough. This part is pretty easy, as long as you have 3 scout units left, because there are usually plenty of valid targets to choose from. The last part sounds easy, but it's not. You need to control and contest a terrain feature that is wholly within enemy territory and more than 6 inches away from your own territory. That means it's at least turn 3 by the time you get into position, and you will need a scout unit that's still alive and is in the right place to contest a valid terrain feature. The key to this card, your scouts don't have to do this alone. They only need to contest the objective or terrain, not hold them by themselves. So support them. Crush the enemy with everything you have. Monsters, ranged attacks, chariots. Okay, maybe not chariots, they're just garbage. And have some cavalry unit right alongside to secure the path. Or, the more obvious approach, just bring all infantry and cavalry, move out, take the objectives and terrain, while destroying everything that comes along. The final card, Attuned to Ghyran. First part, sacrifice, move 2 units into the center of the battlefield. A common mistake here is thinking, I will just park a durable unit in the center, put some support hero behind it, and I'm safe. But here's the problem. In Age of Sigmar, damage is king. Most of the time your opponent can eradicate anything they touch. Even a reinforced unit of Blight Kings melt if they're hit by 2 reinforced hammers. It's better to throw in 2 cheap roadblocks and not overcommit, or just push a fast hammer into your opponent, destroy a few units, and then drop some cheap bodies in the middle. If you position it correctly, they might even survive. Part 2 needs serious setup. You need 2 units to retreat, 2 different units to charge, and a unit that your retreating units were engaged with must be charged by one of your 2 charging units. That's a handful. The charge part is easy, just charge with 2 units. In fact, none of the participating units even need to survive. The retreat part is much harder. Those 2 units must have survived a round of combat, and that's tough because damage is king in Age of Sigmar, especially since your opponent knows about your cards and won't just throw in units into melee blindly. Some armies have tricks that let units get into combat before or during the movement phase, and if that happens, setting up your retreat becomes a lot more manageable. The third part is the very definition of win more. You can only score it if there are no enemy units within friendly or neutral territory, and there is only one way to achieve that goal: destroy the enemy completely. This card demands tanks, cheap chaff, high mobility damage dealers. Wait a second, this tactic may seem difficult, but the required army composition actually sounds very reasonable. Speaking of army composition, let's build some lists. We'll talk in unit types, not specific war scrolls, so this guide applies to every faction, especially yours. There are 3 different list building approaches we need to talk about. First, the one that comes naturally to mind. Build a list that can score all 6 of your battle tactics. But here's the promised twist. That approach might actually be the weakest. Let's break down why. The more you warp your army to match the conditions on the tactic cards, the more you sacrifice raw effectiveness. And these tactics, they're designed in a way that no army can naturally score all of them. So, if you build a list purely to chase tactics, you might end up weaker overall. And weaker means losing the fight over 50 primary points from holding objectives. The second approach is more balanced. Build your list to reliably score the first 2 tactics on each card. This way, your list keeps most of its strength while still giving you plenty of scoring opportunities. And in some games, where you have diminished or even wiped out the enemy, you might even be able to score the final tactics as well, without having built around them at all. The third approach, abandon all reason. Build the strongest list you can imagine, and then pick 2 battle tactic cards that have the easiest start. Spoilers, they end almost impossible. You know the ones. The card that gives you 3 points early on, but become a nightmare to finish unless you've wiped your opponent. Exactly those. Restless Energy and Wrathful Cycles have the easiest first parts. Practically 3 points. But if you're going all in on raw power, Wrathful Cycles might be a trap. Why? Because you will never be the underdog, and that shuts down the rest of the card completely. A better choice might be Attuned to Ghyran. Its first part is slightly harder, but still very achievable, and it doesn't punish you for dominating the game. Here are 2 example lists for this approach. A Stormcast list stacked with hammers and big Karazai, the classic I wreck your face build, and a Khorne list full of hammers and Mr. Damage himself, Skarbrand, another I wreck your face list. You get the point. While your opponent brings a weaker army and tries to complete their battle tactics, you just muscle them out of the objective game and delete anything that gets in your way. Because one thing will never change in wargaming: damage is king. No enemy, no problems. But let's say you're not the hyper-aggressive type. Then it's time to get into the real meat of list building in this GHB. Match the battle tactic cards that can be scored by the same type of army. Or better yet, just stick around, because here are all the condensed summaries. Now we can clearly see which tactic card requires which type of army. Compare the cards that can be scored by similar army types. Then take a close look at the individual tactics on each card and ask yourself, do they align or do they pull your army in completely different directions? Let's go over 6 strong tactic card pairs and break down what makes each one work so well. First pair, Master Paths and Intercept and Recover. This combo works because both cards demand the same core tools: high mobility damage dealers. You will need them to score precise kills for hunting treasure holders and the enemy hero, chase down remaining treasure holders across the board, and eventually reach the corners to finish the final part of Master the Paths. It's a clear synergy. Fast, deadly units doing exactly what they're built to do. Pair 2, Master the Path and Attuned to Ghyran. The key to scoring with this pair is timing. With Master the Paths and Attuned to Ghyran, you can secure the first tactic on both cards early, then shift focus to Attuned to Ghyran, progressing steadily towards the final scoring tier. Here's the clever part. The second tactic of Master the Path and the final tactic of Attuned to Ghyran are very similar. This gives you a clear mid-game goal you can build towards. And once you've achieved it, you'll likely have cleared enough of the board to easily easily finish the final tactics on Master the Paths to pair 3, Restless Energy and Scouting Force. This is a bold and ambitious combo, perfect for aggressive board control playstyles. Why it works. Both cards want you to push hard into the enemy territory, hold objectives and terrain features, and force your opponent off the board. This pairing demands a classic board control strategy. You need a mix of mobile damage dealing units and units with staying power to hold ground once it's taken. Okay, since we're on the topic, let's address the elephant in the room. Infantry and cavalry are the most common and most effective unit types in AOS. And since holding objectives is still the core way to win games, Scouting Force is the most natural and popular choice for most armies. And about the restriction, scout units can't be in combat to complete tactics. This sounds limiting, right? But in reality, it will almost never come up. Why? Because the best infantry and cavalry unit in the game are built to wipe out whatever they touch. Think about it. Exactly. If there is nothing left standing, your scout is suddenly not in combat anymore and ready to score. Now we just need to figure out which second card fits your army and playstyle. Let's do this quickly because the final part of this video covers a new and powerful way to win the games in this season. Scouting Force plus Intercept and Recover. Perfect for armies that lean into mobility and high damage. Scouting Force plus Wrathful Cycles. Great for grindy armies that can bounce back after a rough turn. Scouting Force, I hate this card already, plus Attuned to Ghyran. Ideal if your army is slower but hyper efficient in damage and durability. But wait, have you noticed anything about the new battle tactics system? The sequential scoring isn't just a challenge, it's a vulnerability. One of the most powerful ways in this season isn't just scoring your own points, it's denying your opponent theirs. Focus on shutting down the first mission of any one card your opponent tries to finish. Because if you shut down the entire card, that's a huge point block. You don't even need to interfere with the other card unless your units are already involved. Just focus on shutting down the first mission of one card. Hold your objectives and drag face. That's the game. And here's how you strategize correctly. Up until then, see you and Sigmar out.